start talking today about cells. Cells are the basic unit of life, and basically the biphospholipid layer that we talked about last time that can sequester water both inside and outside of a sphere of water is your basic cell unit. And cells, of course, are the units of life, so that means that they have to be functioning little units of water. And so we're going to talk about how that might happen or the kinds of things that would make them functioning. But the study of cells had to involve looking at things very closely and sort of imagining the basic components of things, which of course was not something that people really noticed until they started looking very closely at things. And that was not until, like the last couple of centuries. Notice that, like, if we were looking at, with the naked eye, we could see things on the gross level, things like eggs that might be some of the smallest things we see. Or if you look at a plant that's very thin, and it has light behind it, you might actually see some cellular units, and that might have been one of the first things that sort of prompted us to look at things a little bit more closely. The light microscope is the kind that we use in the lab. That is, it has light shining through a very small and very thin object so that you can see through it. You can see most cells fairly well that way. You can see sometimes things within cells, in particular the nucleus. You can see bacteria, sometimes mitochondria with the aid of stains, but because those are fairly big. You can see chloroplasts because those are big. So you may not know what those things are that I just said, but you will after the next couple of lectures. And then the very smallest things actually use what they call an electron microscope. These are really huge microscopes that actually use electrons bouncing off of the object, usually coated in some kind of metal, oftentimes gold or something. And this enables them to see, it's kind of like a sonar, and it enables them to see really, really small things very well. Things like viruses, ribosomes, even some of the organic molecules that we have been talking about. So all cells have certain things, all right? So we're going to go over what those are. So we already talked about the phospholipid bilayer. That is the basic component holding the water inside the cell, separating it from outside the cell, which may or may not be water. It might just be another cell, but still it's a unit. And so that's what we call the cell membrane. Oftentimes, though, with this biphospholipid layer, and we'll talk a little bit more deeply about this later, there will be proteins mixed in that, and that's going to enable the cell to take things in and out that are a little bit bigger, things that can't really fit through the biphospholipid layer. Inside the cell, the water that's inside the cell, basically it's not really water, it's got things dissolved in it. A lot of proteins, perhaps carbohydrates, other molecules that we've been talking about that are dissolved within that water, and that is called the cytoplasm. So this is what we call the cell fluid. It can be called the cytosol, plasma. There's various names for it, but cytoplasm is the most common. DNA, all cells have DNA. They have to have some way of coding for information, both for cell division, but also for the making of proteins. Now, proteins in particular are going to be enzymes that help drive chemical reactions. So we are going to talk about that a little deeper later. But chemical reactions require enzymes to help them run efficiently, and that is in a significant way. Basically, they speed up chemical reactions. So the chemical reactions that you need to happen in a cell have to be the ones that are happening in a quick way. And this is going to happen because of enzymes. And because of that, you need the coding information for that, and you need an organelle called a ribosome that will enable you to do that. So all cells of all types have all of these things. Now, there are two basic types of cells. One is called a prokaryote and one is called a eukaryote. Prokaryotes, I'll just back up a little here so you can write down all this. Prokaryotes, the examples are bacteria and cyanobacteria. They're super simple. They have the things that we just talked about. The DNA is in a single circular strand though, and they also, generally speaking, have a cell wall. Eukaryotes are more complex. That's most of the higher level organisms that you know, plants, animals, and fungi. What they have instead is they have membrane-bound organelles or other structures that have very specific functions called organelles. The nucleus is a really big one, and it is membrane bound. It has chromosomes, not a single circular strand anymore. Chromosomes are DNA wrapped around proteins, and usually there's always more than one. I think the smallest number is like 8 of them. And some of the cells have like 200, so there can be many, many chromosomes within the nucleus. And then there's many other structures that we call organelles, and we will talk about those. Now, 2 basic examples of eukaryotes that we're going to use are plant and animal cells. These are just some of the differences that are found between plant and animal cells. There will be a couple more when we go through them, but we have to go through them a little better. But the plant cell in general is kind of a regular shape. It doesn't have to be square, but because of the way plants are built, in other words, they're built kind of like brick walls, you have to have a regular shape that fits next to the next door neighbor plant without a lot of space in between it. It also has something called a central vacuole. A central vacuole is just a structure, a membrane-bound sort of well of fluids that is found within the cytoplasmic fluid, and this is where things are stored, such as the secondary metabolites that we were just talking about. And another big organelle that is really different is the chloroplast. This is why plants are green. Chloroplast is an organelle that is responsible for photosynthesis, and plants, of course, have that. And because of the central vacuole, the nucleus will be pushed over to the side, as will most of the other organelles. In addition to that, there is a cell wall, and we will go over a little bit about this cell wall structure. Animal cells do not have a cell wall. Mostly their nucleus is somewhat central. Not all animal cells are central, but that's often the case. They also have a cell membrane, and some animal cells will have long extensions for moving around called flagella, like a sperm cell, for example, and some of them will have cilia. Cilia are usually covering the whole outside, like hairs or something like that. Not all animal cells have that, but if they do, it would be around the cell. And these are both for movement of the animal cell. And the other thing that they have is something called a centriole. Centrioles or centrosomes are responsible for the creation of the spindle during cell division.